international orchestra touring, books, and how to be a great second bassoonist with Phil Austin. Stay inspired. What qualities make a good second bassoonist?
Okay, Julie, before I answer what qualities make a good second bassoonist, I would like to mention two people that I didn't mention when we did our interview before. And one is my mom, because everybody has to start somewhere. And my mom is the person that took me to my bassoon lessons. She drove me there, and she paid the $5 for my lesson. And so without my mom, I probably, would have done something else for a living. And then the other bassoonists, I mentioned a lot of bassoonists, and I have a lot of good bassoon friends, and two nice ones are supposedly, I think, are here today. That's Juan and Jonathan. And I can't mention everybody, but one guy that I sat next to for about 9 years was Bob Williams, and he's just retired as principal in the Detroit Symphony. And I didn't mention him once in my last thing, but he's a very good, loyal friend to me, and we will always be friends. And he's had some sadness in his life. He lost a son one time in an auto accident, and he's a great player, and just sold his house in Detroit and is living full time in Tucson, Arizona. So shout out to Bob Williams, my good friend, longtime friend. And so now I'll answer the question: what makes a good second bassoonist? Okay, so a second bassoon. I mean, one of the basic things that you need to know if you're a second bassoonist is never come to orchestra and sit on stage and play the solos that the first bassoon's going to play that night, whether or not he's on stage. That is a major no-no. You never do that. If you want to sit at home and practice them, have fun, do it, but never do that. Never sit in front, too far in front of the bassoonist. You don't want to look like you're leading the section. I always try to sit maybe 6 inches behind the principal bassoonist. And if you're one of those players that likes to move around when you play, don't do too much of that if you're a second player, because it could be annoying to the first player. Some principal players, and especially in Europe, they like to emote and look like they're really into it. In this country, not so much, but it does happen. And so you just don't want to try to showboat anybody. Okay. And in terms of being a good second bassoonist, you don't want to be a weak bassoonist. Being second doesn't mean being weak. So if you're playing that Sibelius symphony, that's bum ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum bum. You want to be just as strong as the first player when you answer that melody. And I always look for my little moments to shine in the orchestra. I always enjoyed, one time one of the violinists came up to me and said, "Hey, I heard some nice bassoon playing. I turn around, it was you playing." So that's what you want. You want people to notice that you can do it, even though you usually don't get the melody or the great parts. You can do it. You want to be a strong player and an equal player when it's called for. A good second bassoonist tries to anticipate where the first player is going to play on the beat. Don't come in ahead of the first player. I mean, what you want to do is you want to try and figure out where he plays, and then you're going to come in together. I mean, for it to come in unison, I mean, exact, linked up entrances is perfect. So occasionally you're going to be a little bit ahead of the first player. Occasionally you're going to be behind, but eventually you're going to get some kind of a chemistry where, where you read each other pretty well. And so I think those are some of the, the major, things of being a good second bassoonist. You want to make the first bassoonist look good.
How do you make a good bassoon reed?
I think that a reed has to have a not a round throat, but an oval throat. Yeah. And, I did go study with Lou Skinner in Maine, and I changed my wire dimensions a little bit when I was there. So I like the dimension of 10 millimeters between the middle wire and the second wire. I like 10 millimeters. If you go like 8 millimeters or 7, the sound tends to get a little buzzier. An oval throat, 10 millimeters between the first two top wires, and then 12 below for the next one. And so as I mentioned before, I do not use a collar, and I think a reed should have some heart to it. I think you should have to push into the reed, to make the tone. I don't think I want a reed that you just blow it and it just instantly responds. I want to have to push into it a little bit, and really, if second bassoon, first bassoon, you want a reed that's a little stronger for the upper register. So second bassoon might like a little lighter reed, especially thin out in the back a little bit so that the low notes speak. But I always try to have a decent sound in all registers,
John shared a really great, several really great questions, and I was going to ask a few of them. Could you share, Phil, who were your favorite conductors?
Oh, my favorite conductors are the dead ones. I'm waiting for a couple to die right now. You know what? I love every conductor that doesn't pick on me. I like them all. We've had some nice conductors, and I've had some nice conductors in my life, and they all do some things better than other ones. Kurt Mazur, for instance, is a great musician. Maybe not a very nice man. He's gone now, so I can say that. And we've played for a lot of good conductors over the years, but as long as they leave me alone, I like them usually.
Mm-hmm. Another question that John had asked were about trick or fake fingerings. Could you kind of share how you maybe figured some out, or any really great ones that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, well, Hugh Cooper, who used to teach at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, he wrote a big thick book on fingerings. And of course I have that book. And you can get some good starting points in there, some good things. There are some Mahler symphonies and things that have a bunch of different shakes in them. They're all connected. And so basically you just sit in the studio and you start screwing around. I mean, it sounds awful to, if you live in an apartment building and somebody was right next to you, they'd probably be kicking on the walls. But, you just try different things, just wiggle different fingers. And when you find something that works, write it down.
A lot of those muted fingerings I was finding on F, the pancake key, and is it the pinky too, or just having that, and being able to F sharp coming in really quiet.
Right. Yeah. There's Death and Transfiguration. There's a really low, I think it's a low G. And I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember exactly what I pushed, but I pushed a couple keys and I can make it really, really soft. The low D flat, low C sharp D flat key there, and maybe the pancake key with it. I can't remember, but I can make that really, really soft. Yeah, there are sometimes you have to do that. I remember doing a song cycle with Franz Velsermost, and I had some G's that came in, and I pushed a couple extra. I had to push. It was almost, you didn't want to hear anything out of us, So. Wow. That's one thing about the Cleveland Orchestra. Cleveland Orchestra, you need to play soft.
Juan says, being a rock star, how do you remain so grounded, normal, and a total mensch?
Well, Juan, I've known Juan for a long time. I'm a rock star. Star is not me. But, if I remain grounded, because if you have to have your confidence. If you lose your confidence, you're dead in the water. So, like I said before, if you have a good read, if I'm gonna have a good read, I'm good to go. And if you know your part, and it's. I guess that's about it. I tell you one thing: you got to be tough to be a symphony musician. You might think it's a bunch of wusses in there, but there are people that will strong arm you in the orchestra, and you have to stand up for yourself. You do. You really do.
Stephen Paulson has asked, did you smear shoe polish on your bassoon when you performed at Elvis?
Well, Steve Paulson, what a great player, and I've known him a really long time. Not deep, close personal friends, but a very nice man, great player. No, my bassoon is black. and my bassoon was made around 1962, and Garfield's bassoon in Philadelphia was black. So my bassoon came from Philadelphia. I bought it from Hans Menig. So I believe that was sort of a fad thing for a while to get your bassoon black lacquer. It's not paint, it's black lacquer. So my bassoon is mostly black. It was all black when I got it, and I've worn off wherever my fingers touch now. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and for everyone listening too, Phil on his interview video tours shows us all of his 5 bassoons, and so definitely check that out if you haven't yet. Something I wanted to mention too is Richard Meek interviewed you, Phil, back in 2004. And
oh, I do know him.
Yes.
He came to my house. Oh my God, he could actually try to get hush money from me because I opened my mouth a little more than I should have about a couple people. So he had an interview that could be. I might not want that interview out there, all of it out there.
Phil, yours was one of my very best interviews. Great storyteller, and you probably gave us more information on what the profession was like at that time than almost anybody else I had, including Juan and Jonathan.
Yeah. And I talked about David McGill a little bit on there. Anyway, I said a little more than, which I tend to do. I tend to open my mouth. And I talk before I think, and so
we got a great tour of your figurine collection. We learned about favorite teachers like Kaplan, and you're one of the few people that ever mentioned. What's the New York bassoonist's name?
Lenny Hindell.
No, you talked about Eli Carmen.
Oh, Elias Carmen, yeah. He was my fourth teacher, yes.
Yeah, and you're one of the few people I got to talk even a little bit about Eli.
Yeah, he was a character. I didn't see much of that character thing. I took lessons on Saturday morning with him at Carnegie Hall, and he shared a studio with a clarinet player, I think his name Dan, somebody Weber, well-known New York bassoonist. And that's before they remodeled Carnegie Hall, and people actually had apartments and lived in there and had studios in there. But I paid $15. My first lessons were $5. But the 1971-72 year when I was studying with Eli Carmen, my lessons were $15. I still have some of the canceled checks. But it was Saturday morning. He was pretty sleepy. One time I caught him kind of dozing off during the lesson a little bit. So I don't think my playing was too inspiring that day.
Juan has said that Bernie's horn is now John's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, John Clauser's. Yeah. That was a great thing for John. So when he got Bernie's bassoon, he sounded instantly better.
Wow. Cool.
What a beautiful bassoon. And plays so easily in the low register too. I only played it one time, but I could tell.
Wow.
Yeah.
So John also asked, did you experience any performances that were most memorable that you could share with us, both good or funny or disastrous, anything?
Yeah, we had the Cleveland Orchestra when it goes on tour it always does a good job and always gets great receptions and great ovations. But some of the ones that were the most memorable was when we played in East Berlin before the wall came down, a concert hall that was restored called the Schauspielhaus. And they packed that place. They were still sitting in the aisles. And we did a strange piece by Ives, Unanswered Question, with the trumpet solo off stage. And I don't think the audience quite knew what to think of that piece. But by the end of the concert, the clapping was kind of polite, but not crazy. And they just kept him getting louder and louder and louder. I mean, and the same thing happened when we were in the Czech Republic and in Warsaw, Poland in February of '86. They were just crowded in there. They so much wanted to hear and see the Cleveland Orchestra. And these people behind the Iron Curtain, they loved the idea of freedom, of no longer being under the thumb of Russia and, communist controlled. And, they really admired America at that time. We have some image problems right now, but at that time, what I remember, and actually tears coming down my eyes, to see these people, like, really hardship. They had to stand in line like for 4 hours for sugar and meat, things like that. And, they still dressed in their best clothes, and they came out, and they were proud people from a proud history, trying to look up to America. And they just loved us. And that's what I remember the most. I mean, we've had some great ovations in Vienna. Vienna scares the hell out of me, I'll be honest with you. The Musik Verein, it's the best concert hall in the world, I think. But it's intimate, and you're squeezed in there, and really on the wings, on the back of the first violin section, the back of the viola section, the audience could turn their pages for them. That's how close they are. And it's a gorgeous hall, but such high pressure. So I love when it comes off well and everything goes well, but I will mention that the pressure, the heat really gets turned up when you're playing in these major capitals like Berlin, for instance, and Vienna.
Phil, did you have like a system where, in touring and all these different venues and like with going and checking reeds, or was it just like, okay, I have a few that I'll pick from, or can you share a bit about kind of adapting while touring?
Yeah, I always would leave for a tour with 2 boxes of reeds, and some would be already played some, but not worn out. So I have a reserve box, and then some would be ready to go, and some would be almost ready to go. But I was never one of those people that tried to make an excuse. Oh, I'm playing in Denver, so I need to do this, or we're too close to the water, my reed won't do this. If I had a good reed, it usually worked for me. And if people heard me complain about reeds, I'd like to hear about it, because I don't think I did.
In your 20s, just starting out your music career, something you wish you knew about the music industry?
When I was a younger player, I wish I had tackled the double tonguing thing sooner. I eventually taught myself to do that, but I have to admit, Mendelssohn, the Midsummer Night's Dream music,
Yes.
I can't always say that I played every note, I have to be honest about that. And so I wish I had worked harder on double tongue. I wish I had, to go to a business thing, I wish I had put a little more away for retirement, thought about retirement earlier in my career. A lot of players do that. And I wish I had gotten a high E key sooner on my bassoon, so I could be a little stronger in the really high register. There's a piece by, I think it's by Weber, a survivor from Warsaw, and it has a high F in it. And we took that on tour one time, and when McGill was still in the orchestra, one time I got the high F and he didn't. So there you go. Never mind. Anyway, I have a high note vocal, a nice, all good vocal that worked well.
Do you have a music book recommendation for people to check out?
Oh, well, you know what? Again, what I was thinking was younger players, and I learned about this book in the 70s. I was already in the Detroit Symphony, but it's called The Art of Musicianship by Phil Farkas. And Phil Farkas was a great horn player in Chicago Symphony, I think Cleveland, Boston Symphony, taught at Indiana University. Great player, great pedagogue. And he talked about in this book about phrasing, and he said that every phrase you should have a note that you're playing to. It might be at the beginning of the phrase, might be in the middle, might be the highest note, might be later, but you should not be a bland player. And when you listen to sports players being interviewed on the radio, like LeBron James, it's awful. It's blah, 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 blah. So basically he's saying that you have to do something with a line. You just can't be boring. And he also talks about himself, Phil Farkas, not being a natural, that he had to work and work and work and work and never quit to keep his playing chops up. And Bernard Garfield has said the same thing. He said if he had a big solo, he would sit in his studio and he would practice it hundreds of times.
Juan has shared that the best Rhapsody Espanol I've ever heard was Phil and Bob Williams and Dorati.
Yeah, that was recorded, And I remember doing that recording, and Durati said to us, to Bob and me, he said, "Was it good?" We said, "Yeah, it was good." So he would have done it again, but he trusted us because we knew.
So Phil, is there a bassoon composition that you could share with us as a recommendation?
Well, I did write down a few pieces, and these were pieces that I think are underrepresented, underperformed. And there was a time when everybody was making a CD, right? I never did it. I never made my record, and for whatever reason. But anyway, the title of my album was going to be Fagotten Treasures. So if somebody wants to steal that now, I won't be using it.
Okay.
Treasure. But anyway, the pieces that I could recommend for people to play who like to play chamber music and are looking for interesting works, and maybe not Beethoven septet, or Schubert octet, would be a piece by Karol Krupinski, Karol Krupinski. He was 1785 to 1857. He wrote the piece for it's called Nocturne, for horn, viola, and bassoon. And it's kind of like Rossini, really, really, really fun to play. Had a lot of variations. And there's a piece called a Sonata Opus 13 for bassoon and guitar by Carl Andreas Gepfert, Goepfert. And since we're amongst friends here, I used to say Carl Andreas Goffard. So anyway, it's Gepfert. And that is sort of a classical piece, and it's the key of C, and a lot of movements and a lot of tough page turns and things which you have to deal with, but a lot of fun to play with the guitar. And then the famous Weber Andante and Hungarian Rondo. I have a string trio reduction by Mordecai Reckman, who was principal bassoon of the Israel Philharmonic, and it's a fantastic arrangement. And so that's so much fun to play. And then there's a piece, if you have a friend that plays the double bass, a piece called simply Duo by Albert Roussel. It's for bassoon and double bass, and bass players have to use solo strings. So they have to buy a special set of strings for that. And they have to tune their bass either one step up or one step down. I can't remember, but that's fun. And then there's an interesting piece nobody seems to know about. I did one time. It's for several players. It might be 5 players. One of them is a clarinet, but it's called Serenata in Vano, V-A-N-O, by Carl Nielsen. And it's a cute story. It has to go with a guy who tries to woo a woman, and it doesn't quite work out, so he says, to heck with it. So anyway, it's a fun piece to play, Serenata in Vano. And then there's a piece that Jonathan's teacher recorded, and it's the Phyllis McGinley Song Cycle by Alec Wilder, a really quirky bassoonist who arranged for some famous crooners. The Rat Pack. What's his name? The guy. Anyway, so he hung around Eastman School of Music. And there's a real interesting book about him too, about Alec Wilder. But this Phyllis McGinley Song Cycle is a really touching piece of music about picket fences, and it's really nice. It's for soprano, harp, and bassoon.
It's written for Van Hosen, I believe.
Van Hosen, he recorded it, and that's where I first heard it. So yeah. So anyway,
by the way, if you want to do the Roussel again, there are a lot of problems with that printed edition. And I have an edited one here that corrects all that.
Oh, you do? Okay, well, I probably played a lot of wrong notes. I know balance is a problem with that, for the bassoon not to be too loud. And also in that Carl Andreas Gepfert piece, that the bassoon can easily overpower the guitar. It's a classical guitar.
The problem is it's written for solo bass, so there's a lot of confusion associated with that.
Yeah, that's right. They have to use the solo strings and retune the bass. So anyway, so those are some pieces if somebody's looking for chamber music pieces that aren't the most popular ones. And anyway, those are ones that I enjoyed doing. And there are others too. There are other pieces I didn't want to list too many.
Now, years ago, you told me you had recorded your Phil the Hobo 30-minute series.
Well, Phil the Hobo, yeah, I did that for years in the Chamber Hall at Severance Hall, and those were they were called rainbow concerts for 3 to 6 year olds, and in that thing, I kind of copied Sesame Street, and I had my bassoon all broken down into a trash can, along with a bunch of stuffed animals and things. So I would start with the reed and squawk it, and then I would put the vocal on and go wah wah, I might do a duck, and then I'd add the wing joint and do Mary Had a Little Lamb. You can get the G by just doing the A key with it. Anyway, and then I play the boot joint on, play another little tune, the long joint, and then finally the bell, and then of course I'd have the glove inside the bell, and it, I could suck and blow, and the hand would wave good morning to the kids, and they always got a kick out of that. Well, so I did that when I had a young son. My son Sam was young, and I did it for years, and it wore me out. It just wore me out. They asked me to keep doing it. I said, I've retired the hobo. He's done now.
We talked about one time recording that, and I always hoped you had, so I could add it to your file.
I don't know that I've got it recorded. Ron Phillips, the assistant principal bassoon, suggested that the PBS station in Cleveland should do that, but it never happened. It's okay.
Phil, my question to you, and first of all, hello, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
How are you? You in my mind are the quintessential second bassoonist. You make every principal bassoon player sound like $1 million, from Charlie to Bob to David to John. You are, I grew up hearing you, and you were a hero, and you just, this beautiful, I think always a beautiful sound, just a gorgeous sound. And it just, I think when I think of second bassoon, and that's what I have to do a lot. I remember when I won the job in Atlanta, you told me, you spell that second bassoon player, you make sure that person does not work. And I've always
that's right.
Those words, always.
Yeah.
But your concept of sound though is so, it's like the gold standard. And is there something you have in your ear or in your mind when you're playing something is like the bass of the wind section, or the lower end in the duo, or something that a richness, a warmth? Is there something a concept you have?
Well, Juan, where do I send the check? Thank you for that.
You paid it forward long ago.
You know what? I just got lucky and got blessed that I have a good bassoon to play, and I came up with a reed that worked, and none of the principal players asked me to change my bassoon or my reed. And so I'm just lucky that way. I don't feel that, I'm any sort of a gold standard. I just feel like I was a really solid second bassoon. If I'm one of the best ones, if I was, then, so be it. But, huge ego has never been a big problem for me. So thank you for the nice words.
I think that's what also makes you incredible, is that is not part of the equation ever. Has never been.
Okay. The reeds, I never kept screwing around with the reeds and vocals, and I kind of, like I said, had one bassoon and 2 wives, so I was lucky with the bassoon, And I got a good wife now, though, Emily.
That's right. Yeah, I was just gonna say she's within earshot, isn't she?
Yeah, and
right.
Because my boys might see this sometime. They might tell them.
Well,
not to
hey,
anybody down.
Phil, well, first I wanted to share something that Phil told me when I first got in the orchestra in Cleveland. And, we were talking earlier about, if I have good reeds, and you have to be sort of confident. And one of the things Phil told me, I think we were in the middle of a rehearsal or something, just out of the blue, he said, when I have a good reed, I fear no conductor.
That's true.
And boy, that has stuck with me, ever since. And so I spend a lot of time making sure I have, a good reed. Something I wanted Phil to talk about a little bit, because I don't know how many people, are aware of this. The sort of every other year you've done, a bassoon recital. obviously not in recent years, but for many years you did. And I was lucky enough to be, part of that. And, part of it was, of course, with bassoon recitals, it's always good to have a little shtick, along with it. And I saw and was a part of many, parts of hilarity that were all due to Phil. And I wondered whether Phil could share a little bit in sort of memories. I know one of them was Mary Kay Fink, our piccolo player in the orchestra. I can't remember what piece it was, but he had Mary Kay come dressed as a bird, like a bird did it. She did it, Yeah. Phil also had the ability to talk you into just about anything. So,
well, So, Jonathan, I'll remind you about the first thing I said to you is, can you play a soft, low C? Because your first piece in the orchestra, your first note in the orchestra was a low C, and they also sprach Zarathustra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
it was good advice.
That's what I said. Can you play a soft, low C? Because I'll tell you what, there's hardly anything going on there. And that goes on forever. It's amazing.
Yeah,
but anyway,
it was good advice.
The bassoon quartets were a lot of fun, and they were successful because I worked so hard on them. And I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I want to tell you, I worked really, really hard on those, including producing the program, because community music schools don't do very nice programs, physically, the programs, and interesting research. So I try to always have interesting bios and a little interesting talk about the music and things like that. Good pictures, good covers, some jokes, some bassoon jokes and things in there. And so, yeah, we had a lot of fun with bassoon quartets, and I'm glad you were part of that, Jonathan. You were always ready and willing to do that. And
it was great.
Mary Kay Fink is a fantastic piccolo player, and for some reason she likes me. I don't know why, but she lets me tease. These days you have to be careful how you tease with women and stuff like that. But she would let me, where the line is, she let me go a little bit over the line where other people, she'd bite their head off, maybe.
Yeah, Phil, it would be wonderful to hear more of how you chose your programs and just creatively choosing music and you're making your program. And in your interview, you shared about the photo that Barry Steeze's daughter Grace took of with the fire, and that was
bassoons on fire.
Yeah. Could you share a bit more of just that creative process and coming up with programs?
Well, we have some guys here that fully understand that when you sit in an orchestra, management does not come to you and say, what piece would you like to play next season? What would be your favorite? What would be your first choice? They don't say, what soloist should we choose? Where do we go on tour? They don't ask you anything. And in a way, it's kind of nice, because all you got to do is be ready and show up for work and do your job. You're that cog in there, and you fill that, and they're usually happy. But there are people in the orchestra that have good minds, good ideas, good suggestions, and they never get to offer them. And so I used to think of my programs as the number one reason I did it is because it kept my playing in shape. Because I had to play the first half, I had to play some solo pieces and chamber music pieces. So I had to keep my playing in shape to do that, or I embarrassed myself. And if I kept my playing in shape, then I would still be a good player in the orchestra. So that was the main thing that helped me stay in shape. And then the other reason was that I finally got to be in charge of something. I finally got to run something. And so I would pick the date. I was always trying to, with Doc Nani, there would be times we were doing so much recording that we would go a whole month and maybe have one day off the whole month. So I would always try to find a Sunday afternoon when the conductor was out of town. If he was out of town, then I felt safe that I could schedule something. And then I tried to stay away from snowstorms, but that didn't always happen. But anyway, I worked, and the pieces, I used to buy music like crazy. And then I got to a certain stage in my life, it was before I retired, and I said, what the hell am I doing? I have piles of music I bought, hundreds and hundreds of pieces and hundreds and maybe thousands of dollars. but I haven't played half of them. What am I buying music for? So then I wouldn't buy any more music unless I knew I was going to play it. But some of these pieces that I bought, the little Dotzauer and pieces like that for bassoon and strings, I'd sit home and read through them and see if I like them, and then maybe schedule them. And so that's, I'd find pieces that I wanted to play. And maybe I even did play the Bumblebee one time, but that was kind of weird. I did partita, the violin. I have an arrangement of that. You just take the violin part, put it in bass clef, add a couple of sharps or something, and you can play that. And that's a challenge too, I'll tell you what. But technique, I was never blazing I wasn't scaring anybody with my technique, that's for sure. But it was just barely good enough to get by. But doing recitals really helps, keeps you in shape.
It's amazing hearing too, Phil, how you created this community, of music for people to come and enjoy and highlight the awesome bassoon and have your friends there and the community join. And do you feel like that was something, that grew over time, or, and just getting people excited about the bassoon?
Well, you know what? I'm really not that original a person. The Phil the Hobo thing was a little bit based on the Trash Can and Sesame Street. The bassoon quartets were based on other people, John Miller and the Bubonic Bassoon Quartet, and the group out in Portland, Juan's group, put out some great CDs, and the Boulder Bassoon Band put out a fun cassette at one time, a lot of fun pieces. And so basically it's, and then when I was in the Detroit Symphony, we used to have we did a few bassoon quartets. And Paul Ganson, he was assistant first bassoon, really, really good speaker, really bright man, really smart guy, funnier than heck. And so we sort of got the idea from that people like it when symphony musicians let their hair down and have a little bit of fun, And of course, maybe you can't go too far over the line, but we definitely did some pop tunes Jonathan knows, and Smokey Robinson and stuff. And so, it's fun to do that. It's fun to do that for us, and it's fun to do that for the audience. And at the Cleveland Music School Settlement, as I mentioned, you have, it was a living room and a dining room of an old house, essentially, with really nice acoustics. And basically, we would have people sitting in the hallway and in the office across the hall with the door open and standing, and you'd have 250 people in there, and it looked like a huge happy place. And if you did it in a bigger hall with 600 seats, it looked half empty, and it's just not the same feeling.
A course in university for students that you wish they had the opportunity to take?
The only thing that I would say is when I took music education, I got a degree in music education, is I really didn't feel like how to react with the children. I didn't have any idea how to control them or inspire them, or I didn't feel like that part of it was very well handled, actually. But in terms of preparing yourself for a professional performing career, I think you learn along the way. You have to be punctual. You have to know your part. You have to be there. You be prepared. You do your job. In terms of what a class could teach, I don't know how they teach that. What they should do is when people sign up for music performance degree, they should say, you have like a 5 to 10% chance at the best of actually making your living doing this. You understand that. All that money you're paying for tuition. Maybe you'll end up going into music history or music administration, or maybe you'll become a composer, or maybe it'll help you in some other way. But most of you, for sure, are not going to make your living playing in a symphony orchestra. So, it's kind of I don't want to use any bad words, but it's kind of you can't break the cycle, because the teachers all have to have so many students in their class, or they can't be full-time, and it's tough. It's really tough.
Could you share some of yours and Emily's favorite places that you've
okay.
to?
Well, I've always been collegial, I guess you could say. If an orchestra would come to Cleveland, I used to live near Severance Hall, and I had a nice big old house. So I would try to have the bassoons come over to the house. I'd meet them in intermission or before the concert and say, would your colleagues like to come to my house and I can give you a ride and we can have some food and drink and then I can take you back to your hotel, that sort of thing. So because of that, I met Jerzy Seidel, who I've told you about from the Czech Philharmonic. They were in Severance Hall. And then when we were on tour in Poland in February of '86, I met Eugene Stolen, who was a member of the Warsaw Philharmonic. And so those are two foreign bassoonists that I've known for many, many, many years. And I met them, by reaching out to say hello. When we were in Poland in '86, Eugene Stola invited my first wife. We had a 2.5-year-old son, Sam, my oldest one. We had him on tour with us, and that was before the wall came down. So my wife had to go on different trains, and when we flew, they had to be stopped at the border by going in from Germany to Poland or whatever. They had to change trains, and they had to be interviewed and talked to by security agents and things like that. It was really, really kind of scary and kind of interesting. But anyway, so we were in Poland, and so the Warsaw Philharmonic had a rehearsal. So I went with my wife and our 2.5-year-old, and we went to the Warsaw Philharmonic Concert Hall, and they let us in. Other members of the Cleveland Orchestra went there to hear the rehearsal, but they didn't. But if you had a kid with you, apparently, they gave you, some slack. So, because it was the coldest winter in history. It was so cold, I can't tell you. But so intermission, they were doing a Mendelssohn. Oh, what's the Mendelssohn symphony kind of piece with the chorus? What's it called? Not Lobgesang. Mendelssohn. What's the piece with chorus? Anyway, they were doing that, and so I went up in intermission and asked one of the violinists. I said, "Fagot, Fagot, Spieler, Fagot." So she went and got a bassoonist. So it was Eugene. He spoke some English. So he couldn't get into the concert, by the way. He could not get a ticket, and I couldn't help him either. But he had us over to his apartment for lunch one day, and we met. He had a little kid that was about the age of our kid. I wish I was doing what Juan's doing there. He's having a nice glass of wine. But anyway, so they gave us presents. They gave us a comforter, and he took us around, to a music store, and he's just so warm and friendly. So I used to send him a Christmas parcel every year after that, really, until he got too many grandkids and things that I couldn't, give him each something anymore. So I just sent a check. But after I retired, a couple years after that, Emily and I went to Poland, and Eugene figured out a trip for us, and we rented a car and went to Krakow and to a couple of concentration camps, and to his hometown, which also had a concentration camp. It's Poniatowa, it's called. And so we had a really, really nice time. And so he was with us the whole time. It was like 8 or 9 days. And we even stayed in his apartment one night. He stayed with his nephew. And so I'll tell you a story, which, again, sort of goes over the line a little bit, but my wife and I use it all the time, and we have so much fun with it. But Eugene, his apartment was smaller than any apartment I ever saw. You literally could not turn around in his bathroom. His kitchen, there was no counter space. And he didn't have a living room, but he had a seat, a little couch thing, which he folded down and made into a bed. He wanted us to spend the night in his apartment. He had to support it with a board at the bottom of it. So he went and stayed with his friend, his cousin or something like that. So we're sleeping in his little apartment. And in the middle of the night, there's some noises going on. And Emily says, "Phil, do you hear that sound?" There was some rhythmic, thumping stuff going on. And Emily says, I think that's some little Polish wife chopping vegetables for her husband going off to the factory or something. I said, "Emily, that is nobody chopping vegetables." So now that's our big joke, the chopping vegetables. And you can figure out what they were actually doing in the middle of the night with the rhythmic thumping. But so anyways, we had that beautiful trip in Poland. And then I have this other friend from the Czech Philharmonic. And a few years later, they actually hired me to play on a Mahler symphony, a couple performances, and we played in that crappy outdoor concert hall outside of Vienna. Jonathan, what's it called, that outdoor place there? You know, the whatever it is. Anyway, so then Jerzy came with his car and his friend Pavla, and they picked us up the next day. They came to the concert and they picked us up the next day and drove us back to the Czech Republic. And they booked us a hotel downtown Prague, which was a really interesting, old-fashioned, colorful hotel right in the middle of everything. So we didn't stay at his house or anything like that like we did with Eugene Stola, but we had, each day we would go out and do day trips. And of course, my big hobby is collecting clothing buttons. So they took us up to Jablinec, which is up in the north of Poland, and that's the glass making industry Czech of the Czech Republic, back when it was Bohemia and into the 1800s, and still is to this day. After the Second World War, that town was a lot of it was German, and they kicked them right out. They kicked the Germans out, and so the town looks a little bit empty because it's never really restored, and the button industry is the glass button industry has been replaced by the plastic buttons, but it was still great to go and see the the glass button manufacturing, and they're still making them, and they still have this old machinery that's 100 years old. So he took us up there. He took us to a little town outside of Warsaw where it's a church, and the entire church is decorated with bones. And if you want to figure out what the name of that place is, I can't remember. You can put Bone Church, Poland, and you can not Poland, Czech Republic, and it's really interesting in there because all the designs on the walls and everything are all done with human bones.
It said like Ossuary Church.
Yeah, I think that's it. If you look that up and if you can see pictures, it's all bones. Yeah. And of course, in the house where Bruckner was the organist, they have in the church the Catholic place there where Bruckner was the organist. Jonathan, come on.
Oh, sorry. Now that you can't remember, of course I can't remember it. It's outside of Linz.
St. Florian.
St. Florian.
Yes.
Thank you.
St. Florian.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Bruckner's buried under the ground there, and there's a bunch of famous people buried there. But they just have all these skulls stacked, and they make a pyramid with them. And it's weird. In Europe, when they bury you, they don't bury you forever. You're buried for 10 years, and if you don't keep paying money, then they dig you up and put someone else. So, weird.
About your button collection and just like hobbies outside of music, Phil, how did you start collecting buttons?
Well, I collected clothing buttons because my ex-wife was a quilter. So she would buy cotton fabric. When you quilt with cotton fabric. And she would need needles and threads, and she would go to estate sales, and she would buy like a sewing box and come home and dump it out, and there'd be buttons in there. So I looked at a little black button one time, and there was writing on the back. I got a magnifier, and it said, Goodyear's, patent 1851. I said, oh my God, this button's like 175 years old. So I actually got more into buttons than she did. So we joined a club, and I started giving talks and things like that. So that was 1994. And so prior to 1994, when I'd go on tour, if I had free time, I would look for bassoon figurines, but I would also look for fabric for my first wife. And in Japan, they have some fabulous fabric. Hello Kitty stuff, really good quality, nice stuff. In Hong Kong, a lot of stuff, not as good a quality, cheaper, but still, it was all fun and all interesting. And I think I'm socially okay, but a lot of people on tour they get in a clique. So when they go on tour, you'll see the same group of 3 or 4 people. They hang out the entire tour. They do every meal together, or whatever. And I love having communal meals on tour, and several of them on a tour, and always try to do one with the bassoon section, and John will bear that out, that we would always do that. But a lot of times I was kind of a loner, because I would go out and look for my buttons after 1994, and I'd walk miles to find a button store. And, so that's what I would do. And so I did bassoon figurines, and then I did fabric, and I did the buttons. And the buttons I have so many buttons. I can't tell you how many buttons I have. But it's been a rough year. It's been a rough year for all of us, and a rough year because we haven't. None of us have. Well, Julie, you've been playing because New Zealand was so smart, but most of us haven't played hardly anything in a year or more. And the same thing with the buttons. 2 national shows were canceled, and it's really, I've been kind of a lost soul here for a while, except for when somebody would bring me a carton of, a 4-pack of Grolsch beer, maybe Jonathan Sure.
Yeah, well,
But we always try to have a bassoon day on tour.
Yes.
I would frequently come up with the idea. We'd go to the graveyard in Vienna, for instance, where a lot of famous composers are buried. And so we did one thing. We had, I think it was Berg, one of those, Weber, one of those guys. The 3 of us, we had hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. We took our picture with the marble stone thing there.
Yeah, I think we got one picture in there with all of us in our fingers in our ears. Yeah. Something very disrespectful.
Yes. But I just want to go back just for a second. There's a lot of fun things that happen on tour, but in the profession, you all know this, there's a lot of stress, and it's maybe not as tough as being up to the plate in a baseball game in the 9th inning with 2 outs. Maybe not that kind of pressure, but the pressure never goes away. And I remember joining the Detroit Symphony, and when you're doing music, you're playing music. He said, you don't use the word play. You're going to work. This bass player, assistant librarian, said, you're going to work. You're working. You're working for a living. And boy, did that ever end up being true. You're playing. That's why so many people like to do it. But you're working. Mm-hmm. And when you've been to the Music Verein for the 10th time, the joy of seeing the city isn't there so much anymore. Juan, do you still have that contra bassoon Christmas ornament I mailed you, or did you never get?
Oh yes.
Okay, that's better on your tree than my tree.
You know what's amazing? You've sent me all your programs, which I so appreciate, and I actually have one little story to add to the touring, the creating community. When you guys toured out, I think it was in the 80s, you toured out to Portland, and the thing that was so incredible is you traveled with copies of Ralph's Secret Weapon in your suitcase. And you gave one to our principal bassoon player, Mark Eubanks, for his son. And I thought that was the most, who does that? Who goes out of their way to have something to create connection? And it just, that just, again, speaks volumes about you and the kind of person you are. And why I'm such a fan. And by the way, this T-shirt, that is John's bassoon. That's Bernie, and that's John's bassoon.
He was my hero. Garfield was my hero growing up. Yep.
So anyway, this is a treat. When I saw this online, it was like, oh man, are you kidding? Thank you for doing this. Thank you, Julie, so much.
Yes. Yeah, Julie.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.